Hey, amazing people. If you're subscribed, then you're a legend. Thank you so much. But most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please smash that sub button and join the family. We're almost at 30,000 subs, so let's make that happen. It's free and really means a lot to us. Thank you so much. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoy these stories. It started out like any normal night. Mason and I had met two girls while we were over in Germany. We were on a little trip, not expecting much but some good food, maybe some sightseeing, and definitely some decent company. A friend of mine had connected us with these two girls, and it seemed like a good idea to hit up a local bar. You know, a little fun, some drinks, a good time. Nothing out of the ordinary. But this night would end up being nothing like what I expected. It was a Friday, and we were at a bar that had a pretty chill vibe, just off the beaten path, in some older part of town. You could tell it had history, the kind of place where people had come to drink and talk for decades. There was a thick haze of smoke lingering in the air, low lighting, a jukebox playing some old school rock. You could almost feel the weight of the years hanging in the walls. We found a table at a window where you could look out and see the cobblestone streets and the occasional passerby. Mason and I had already been there for a bit, nursing our beers when the girls showed up. They were a little older than we expected, but whatever, not a huge deal. We didn't think much of it at first. There was something about them, though, that didn't sit right. You could almost feel it in the air when they walked in, like the whole vibe shifted. Still, we pushed it aside. They were both pretty, no doubt. The mom had this classic, timeless beauty, long dark hair, dressed in a tight black dress that made her look way younger than she probably was. The daughter, on the other hand, looked just a couple years younger than us. Maybe late 20s, early 30s, hard to say. She had that wild, spontaneous energy about her, but there was something unsettling in her eyes, like she was constantly looking for something, like there was always something missing. Anyway, we all sat down and started talking about the usual stuff, where we were from, what we did, how we ended up in Germany, and that's when I started to notice the little things. At first, it was nothing, just these weird, tiny details. The way the mom looked at the daughter. Not like a mother looks at her kid, more like, I don't know, an almost fond admiration. It was subtle, but enough to make you pause. The daughter would glance at her mom too, and there was this strange intensity in her eyes, as if they shared some secret, something no one else knew. But then things started getting even weirder. As the night went on, the more I noticed how they moved together. There was this rhythm to their actions, like they were almost in sync with each other, finishing each other's sentences, laughing at the same time, even when no one else was laughing. They drank together, taking their shots in perfect sync, as if everything about them was choreographed. Mason was drunk already, talking about some nonsense, but I wasn't nearly as buzzed. I kept watching the two of them, and it became clear that there was something off about them. Maybe it was the way the mom kept touching the daughter's arm, or the way the daughter leaned in a little too close when she spoke to her mom. Maybe it was the way their laughter sounded too similar. I can't really explain it, but something just felt wrong. The more we talked, the more I started to feel like I was missing something. Like I should have noticed this earlier, but now it was right in front of me and I couldn't put my finger on it. The turning point came when the daughter started talking about her past. She mentioned a few things about how she had lived in a few different cities in Germany, but she never really said which ones. It wasn't a huge deal, but her answers were vague enough that it made me start paying closer attention to her. At some point, Mason was going on about some concert he had seen in Berlin, and the daughter leaned over and whispered something in her mom's ear. The mom smiled in this strange, knowing way, and for a split second, I saw her glance at Mason, then back at her daughter. It was then that it hit me. I knew something wasn't right, and not in the usual something's off way that we all sometimes feel. This was different. I'm talking about a gut feeling that screamed at you from inside, a sense of realization that's so sharp, it almost feels like a punch to the stomach. I think it was my notice the mom's ring, the one she was wearing on her right hand, just next to her pinky. It was a family heirloom, or at least that's what she had told us earlier. But when I saw it, I had this sudden thought. That ring was way too similar to the one I saw on the daughter's hand. The daughter's ring had the same intricate design, but it was more worn down, like it had been passed on from someone else. I could feel my heart rate pick up as I looked between the two of them. The more I stared, the more pieces started to click together. I looked at Mason, trying to give him a silent warning, but he was too far gone, nodding along to whatever the daughter was saying about her time in Berlin. She was talking about some random stuff, but there was a look on her face now like she knew what I was figuring out. Her eyes darted from her mom to me, and for just a second, the mask slipped. She didn't look like a carefree, fun-loving girl anymore. It was like something cold was staring back at me. That's when the mom reached over to touch the daughter's hand, and for the first time I realized they were way too close. Not in a family kind of way, but in a way that suggested something a lot darker. My mind was racing now, trying to make sense of it all. Was it possible that these two were something more than just mother and daughter? I couldn't believe it, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The way they acted, the way they spoke, the way they looked at each other. There was no way this was normal. They weren't mother and daughter. They were something else entirely. I couldn't stay there any longer. I don't even know why I didn't leave sooner, but I had this nagging feeling that I had to get Mason out of there before things got even worse. I stood up, told him we were leaving, but Mason didn't even seem to hear me. He was too drunk, too caught up in the conversation. It took me what felt like forever to drag him out of the bar. As we walked out, I glanced back, and I swear I saw the daughter smile. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was something darker, something knowing. When we got back to the hotel, Mason passed out almost immediately. I stayed up for a while, just staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. But no matter how many times I went over the night in my head, one thing was clear. Those two weren't just mother and daughter. They were something else, and I don't think I'll ever fully understand what they were. We left Germany the next morning, and I hadn't thought about them in a long time. But even now, whenever I think about that night, I can still see their eyes staring back at me, as if they're still waiting for me to figure it all out. It started out as a simple get-together, the kind of thing where you just want to catch up with friends, have a drink, and talk about anything and everything. It was me, my boyfriend Harry, my best friend Katie, and her boyfriend Mike. Nothing weird about that, right? Just a casual night out at a bar in the city, enjoying the vibe, having some laughs. But what should have been a normal evening quickly turned into something I'll never forget. Harry and I arrived first, just a bit ahead of Katie and Mike, and we picked a table in the corner of this dimly lit pub. The kind of place where the walls are covered in old sports memorabilia, and the air always smells like beer and fried food. We grabbed a round of drinks, and before long, Katie and Mike showed up, looking excited to see us. They'd been busy with their own stuff lately, so it had been a while since we'd all hung out together. We exchanged hugs, sat down, and started talking about what's been going on in our lives. Everything was fine at first. We were all chatting, laughing about stupid things, catching up on what had happened over the past few weeks. The usual stuff. But then, of course, someone had to bring up football. I should have known it was going to get messy the moment Mike mentioned something about Real Madrid's latest win. Mike and Harry had this weird, ongoing rivalry when it came to football teams. Mike was a die-hard Barcelona fan, while Harry had always been a Real Madrid supporter. They'd never seen eye to eye on it, but usually it was just harmless banter. At least, that's how I thought it was going to be tonight. But the moment the topic came up, the mood started to shift. The conversation went from light and funny to this weird tension-filled back and forth. Katie and I tried to joke around, telling them both to calm down, but it didn't work. The more they talked about their teams, the more it was like the whole room began to close in on us. Mike started bringing up old matches, trash-talking Real Madrid, while Harry would shoot back with how much better Real Madrid was in terms of overall stats and history. I could see both of them getting worked up, and before I knew it, they were practically yelling across the table at each other. I tried to distract them with other topics, but it didn't matter. The football debate had taken over, and there was no going back. Mike's face had turned red, and Harry was getting just as heated. I could see Katie shifting uncomfortably in her seat, clearly embarrassed by how quickly this was spiraling out of control. And me, I was just sitting there trying to figure out how this was all going to end. It wasn't long before the argument escalated. Mike, clearly pissed off, slammed his hand down on the table, making everyone jump. The people around us were starting to look at us, and I could feel the tension rising. Harry shot back with some snarky comment, and next thing I knew, Mike stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. It all happened so fast. 1 second, Mike was standing, looking like he was about to explode, and the next, he was swinging at Harry. I couldn't even process it for a second. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Mike's fist was aimed directly at Harry's face, and before I knew it, Harry ducked and the punch missed. But that didn't stop the chaos from unfolding. The next thing I knew, both of them were on their feet, pushing and shoving each other, knocking drinks over, and causing an absolute scene. KB screamed at Mike to stop, but he wasn't listening. He was shouting something about how Harry needed to learn some respect for his team. Harry wasn't much better, matching Mike's aggression with his own words, yelling back about how Barcelona didn't stand a chance. It was honestly like watching two kids in a playground fight, but the tension between them was real, and the anger in their eyes was so intense that it felt like I was watching a completely different side of both of them. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed Katie's arm, trying to pull her out of the way of the mess they were making, but at that point, the whole place had stopped what they were doing. The bartenders had stepped back, watching, probably unsure if they should step in or not. The atmosphere was so uncomfortable, and I could feel everyone's eyes on us, judging the whole situation. Then came the security. I saw the big guy in a black shirt stride over, his boots thudding heavily against the floor. His voice was low and calm, but I could tell he wasn't messing around. He told Mike and Harry to stop immediately and that we're all getting kicked out if the fight didn't end. Mike and Harry, still glaring at each other, finally took a step back, but the damage was already done. People were whispering, and it felt like every pair of eyes in the room was on us as the security guard told us to leave. I could feel the heat rising in my face, my stomach twisting with embarrassment. Katie was holding her head in her hands, mumbling something about how she couldn't believe this was happening. Mike and Harry didn't say much as we all gathered our things, our once fun night completely ruined. No one even apologized. It felt like we were all stuck in this awkward silence as we walked out of the bar, heads down, trying not to make eye contact with anyone around us. When we finally stepped out into the cool night air, it felt like a huge relief, but it also didn't feel over. I couldn't shake the tension between Mike and Harry. There was this heavy silence between us as we walked toward the cars. I glanced over at Harry, who was fuming, trying to calm himself down. Katie was doing her best to talk to Mike, but it was clear the fight wasn't over for either of them. We all ended up going our separate ways. Harry and I back in the car, Mike and Katie in theirs. It was the longest drive home. I couldn't believe how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. What was supposed to be a fun catch-up had turned into a full-blown disaster. The worst part, I had no idea what was going to happen the next time we saw them. Would it still be awkward? Would Mike and Harry even talk again? I didn't know, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. And that was how our double date went. A simple argument over football, and suddenly, everything was ruined. It was a mess, and I don't think I'll ever look at those two teams the same way again. It started like any other double date. My wife Sarah and I had just moved into our new apartment, and we were looking forward to having Kate, her best friend, and her fiancé Greg over for a night of food, drinks, and catching up. The place was still a little bare since we hadn't fully unpacked, but it felt cozy. The view from the balcony was amazing, and we were excited to have people over for the first time since we moved in. The night started off fine. We ordered some takeout, cracked open a couple of beers, and started talking about everything and nothing at all. We were out on the balcony, enjoying the fresh air when I noticed him. At first, I thought it was just some random guy waiting for someone across the street, but the longer I looked, the more I started to feel uncomfortable. There was a man sitting in a car, parked across the street from our building. He wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting there staring at our apartment. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he was waiting for someone or just lost in thought. But the longer I watched him, the more it felt like something wasn't right. I mentioned it to Sarah and Kate, and we laughed it off like it was no big deal. After all, what were the odds that he was looking at us right? But even as we joked about it, I couldn't stop glancing back at the man. His car was parked on the side of the street, and he didn't seem to be moving at all. I didn't think much of it at first, but it just started to feel off. Like he was watching us, even though we were so far away. Sarah and Kate didn't seem as concerned, and Greg didn't say much either. A few minutes later, to my surprise, the man got out of his car. He didn't rush. It was like he was moving in slow motion, deliberately walking to the curb before heading up the steps of our building. My stomach dropped. I turned to Sarah and tried to play it off, but my heart was pounding. He didn't look like he was in a hurry, and the way he walked up to our building, it didn't sit right with me. He didn't seem like someone who was just passing through. It felt like he was coming straight for us. I grabbed my phone and tried to act casual. I couldn't stop looking out the balcony door. The man stopped at the entrance of our building and just stood there. He wasn't doing anything, just standing perfectly still. It was creepy. I wasn't sure if I should call it cops or not, but I didn't want to overreact either. I decided to check the security cameras just to see if a guy had been there before. I was hoping it was nothing, that he was just some guy who had parked his car, but when I checked the footage, I saw something that made my stomach flip. He had been standing outside for hours. The cameras had picked him up when he first arrived, and he just sat in the car, not moving for God knows how long. Then he had gotten out and walked up to the building, just like I saw. I showed the footage to Sarah and Greg, and they both agreed it was weird. Greg, not wanting to escalate things, said it might just be some guy who was lost or had car trouble, but I couldn't shake it. The whole thing felt too planned, too deliberate. After some hesitation, Greg and I decided to go down and confront him. We weren't sure what we were going to say, but at that point, I wasn't about to let some random guy just hang around our building without knowing what he was up to. We took the elevator down and walked outside. When we approached him, he didn't seem startled or worried at all. He just stood there looking at us. There was no hesitation in his voice when he spoke, just an eerie calmness. When we asked what he was doing, he simply said, "I'm looking for someone." That's it. No explanation, no reason. Just, "I'm looking for someone." I don't know why, but it felt like an answer that didn't quite make sense. It felt rehearsed. Greg and I both stood there for a second staring at him, and I could tell Greg was starting to get frustrated. We didn't know if this guy was just some weirdo or if there was something more to it. We told him we were going to call the police. At that point, I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid, but there was something about the way he was standing there, the blank look on his face, that made me think we weren't dealing with a random person. We went back inside and called the cops. We explained everything. The guy sitting in the car, the weird behavior, the footage. The police said they'd send someone right away, but when they arrived, the man was gone. Just like that. There was no sign of him anywhere. The cops checked the area, but nothing. No car, no man, no trace. It was like he vanished. It didn't make any sense. The police didn't have much to say. They told us to be cautious and that they'd patrol the area more, but honestly, I wasn't feeling much better after they left. That night, the man's face kept flashing in my mind, and I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had stood there like he was waiting for something. Or someone. The weirdness didn't stop there. Over the next week, Sarah and I started noticing strange things happening in the apartment. Little things. Nothing huge, but enough to make us uneasy. A kitchen drawer would be open when we were sure it had been closed. Our keys, which we always kept on the kitchen counter, started to feel off, like they'd been moved around. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but every time it happened. At first, I thought maybe we were just being paranoid. But then one night, I was checking the security cameras again, just to make sure everything was fine, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. There on the footage was the man standing outside our building again, just like before. He wasn't in his car this time. He was standing across the street watching our apartment. We didn't know who he was, and we didn't know what he wanted. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, I felt like we were being watched, not just by anyone, but by someone who had been lurking around our lives for days, if not longer. Someone who knew more about us than we were comfortable with. We never figured out who the man was or what he wanted. Eventually, things went back to normal, or at least it felt that way. But every time I walk past the balcony now, I can't help but feel like someone is still watching us. And sometimes when I check the cameras, I still wonder if he's out there waiting. I'll never forget that night. It was supposed to be a fun double date, you know. Just me, my girlfriend Lily, and our friends Megan and Daniel. We heard about this new fancy restaurant that had just opened in the city, and we thought it'd be a great way to catch up with everyone while also enjoying some nice food. The place had this intimate, cozy vibe that made it feel like we were in some sort of secret, upscale spot that only a few people knew about. Everything was set up to be perfect, but I didn't know it would all go south so quickly. We arrived first, just a little ahead of Megan and Daniel, and the moment we walked in, it was everything I'd hoped for. The dim lighting, the plush chairs, the quiet hum of conversations around us. It was the kind of place where you could just unwind and feel like you were in a different world. We sat down at a booth in the corner, ordered a couple of drinks, and began chatting while we waited for our friends to show up. When they finally walked in, it was clear they were already a little off. Megan was smiling, but there was something about her that felt off. She didn't seem as excited as usual. Daniel, on the other hand, looked his usual self, calm, confident, maybe even a little too comfortable. But nothing out of the ordinary, right? As we ordered appetizers and got into the evening, I started noticing weird little things about Megan. At first, it seemed like she was just distracted, maybe a bit tired, but then it kept happening. She kept glancing down at her phone, looking at it under the table, texting furiously. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was hard not to notice how her attention was completely elsewhere. Daniel didn't seem to mind. He was laughing along with Lily and me, sharing stories from his day, but Megan wasn't really engaging. Every few minutes, her eyes would flicker down to her phone, and it was like she was completely ignoring everything else around her. It wasn't just a habit, though. It was almost as if she was hiding something. I didn't want to be the nosy guy, but after a while, I couldn't help myself. My eyes kept drifting over to her phone, trying to catch a glimpse of what she was texting. And then it happened. I saw it. She was scrolling through a conversation between Daniel and another woman. I didn't get to read all of it, but what I saw was enough. The words were personal, way too personal. Things that only Daniel and this woman would know about. I looked at Lily, who was also noticing Megan's weird behavior, and I could see that she was just as uneasy as I was. Lily leaned in a bit and quietly whispered to me, asking if I thought something was going on. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just shrugged, trying to act like it was nothing, but I couldn't stop the sinking feeling in my stomach. The tension in the air was palpable. It wasn't even just the phone that was making me uncomfortable, it was the whole vibe. Megan had gone silent. Her usual jokes, her laughter, everything about her felt off. She kept scrolling, texting, and glancing up at Daniel, but not really talking to him. Daniel, on the other hand, was oblivious, or at least he seemed to be. He kept talking, unaware of what was happening right under his nose. It was like he had no idea how strange it all looked. Then things took an even darker turn. Out of nowhere, the waiter approached our table with an envelope in his hand. He walked up to me and handed it over. No explanation, no words, just the envelope. I stared at it for a second, feeling an odd sense of dread creeping up my spine. I glanced at Lily, with the same confused expression on her face. The waiter just left without saying anything else. I opened the envelope slowly, unsure of what I was about to read. Inside was a note. It was addressed to Megan. My heart skipped a beat as I read the words that followed. The note was detailed, describing things about Megan's relationship with Daniel that, well, only the other woman could possibly know. Personal things, little details that only Daniel would have shared with someone close. The kind of things that, if they weren't true, would make anyone's stomach turn. I looked up from the note, my eyes meeting Lily's. She looked as stunned as I felt. Megan's face had gone pale, and she was frozen in place, staring at the note. Daniel hadn't seen it yet, but I knew this wasn't going to end well. I tried to hand the note to Megan, but before I could, she snatched it from my hands. Her eyes darted around the table, looking at all of us, but there was nothing she could do to hide the panic on her face. I wasn't sure what was happening, but at that moment I knew the night had taken a dark turn. Megan stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back in the process. Daniel seemed genuinely confused, asking her what was going on, but Megan was already storming off to the bathroom, her face red with anger and embarrassment. It was silent for a while. Lily and I just looked at each other, unsure of what to say or do. Daniel sat there, staring at the place where Megan had been. The look on his face, it was a mix of confusion and guilt. It was like he was realizing something was very wrong, but couldn't figure out how it had all gotten out of hand. When Megan came back, it was a full-on confrontation. She walked straight up to Daniel and demanded to know why he'd been texting another woman. Daniel tried to deny everything at first, but the more he fumbled with his words, the more it was clear that he had been caught. Megan wasn't having it. The fight that followed wasn't just awkward, it was painful to watch. They were yelling at each other in front of us, their relationship crumbling right before our eyes. We sat there completely helpless as our argument continued. It was like we were invisible. It wasn't even our fight, but we were in the middle of it. The worst part, Megan already knew. It was clear now that she had known about the affair for a while, but she had kept it to herself. The note had confirmed everything, and as much as Daniel tried to explain, Megan wasn't having any of it. The rest of the night was a blur of awkward silences, forced smiles, and tense moments. We ended up paying for the meal in complete silence. I could barely look at anyone, and when we finally got outside, there was this heavy weight in the air. Megan and Daniel didn't say goodbye. They just left. I could tell they were both too embarrassed to even look at us. And Lily and I, we just got in the car, drove home, and didn't speak for a while. It wasn't the double date we planned, that's for sure. It was supposed to be fun, a night to remember for the right reasons. But instead, we were left with the lingering tension of a breakup we never asked to witness. It's one of those things that even now I can't fully shake. The moment when you realize you've accidentally been thrust into someone else's personal nightmare, and there's nothing you can do but watch as it falls apart. It was supposed to be a fun night out, the kind where you don't have to worry about anything except enjoying the food, the drinks, and the company. My boyfriend Jack and I had been talking about going to this new speakeasy style bar for a while, and when our friends Lucy and Tim were free, we thought it'd be the perfect double date. The place was getting rave reviews with its hidden entrance, dim lighting, and old school cocktails. The kind of place that feels cool just walking through the door. But what happened that night? It wasn't something we ever could have predicted. We got there early, grabbed a booth in the back, and started ordering drinks. The vibe was exactly what we expected. Smooth jazz in the background, the bartender making fancy drinks that looked like they belonged in a black and white movie. Lucy and Tim were in high spirits. We were all laughing, chatting about nothing in particular. It was easy, fun, carefree. The type of night you think you'll remember for all the right reasons. That was until Lucy went to the bathroom. At first, it seemed like nothing out of the ordinary. We were all talking and catching up when she excused herself to head to the ladies' room. We didn't think much of it. Jack and I kept talking about the drink we just had, and Tint was off scrolling through his phone, probably checking the game or something. The usual stuff. It wasn't until Lucy came back that the mood started to change. She walked in through the door and stopped dead in her tracks, her face pale, her hands gripping the door frame for a second before she even fully stepped inside. I thought maybe she had just seen someone she knew, or maybe she wasn't feeling great. But when she sat down, I could tell something was off. She looked shaken, like something had happened, and she didn't know how to explain it. We asked her if she was okay, and at first, she just said she was fine. But then she looked around at the three of us, kind of hesitated, and then quietly said that while she was in the bathroom, someone had whispered to her. Not just a voice in her head, not like she was imagining things. She said she heard it clearly right in her ear. You don't belong here. Tim, being the practical guy he is, just laughed it off. He said something like, maybe it's just some weird coincidence. But I could see it in Lucy's face. This wasn't just a random thing. She was visibly unsettled. Her voice cracked a little when she talked about it, and her eyes kept darting around the room like she was looking for someone. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I could tell she was on edge, and that made me uncomfortable too. It wasn't like her to get so worked up over something that didn't seem that serious. The night carried on, but the atmosphere had changed. Even though we tried to joke around and move on, something felt off. The drinks weren't hitting the same way, and the music seemed too loud. We were just going through the motions, trying to pretend like everything was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, and then it happened. We were getting ready to leave. The night had gone on long enough, and we all decided to call it a night. As we stepped out of the bar, I turned around to get one last look at the place, and that's when I saw him. The guy. The one who had been in the bathroom, the one who had whispered to Lucy. He was standing outside, just across the street, staring at us. I looked over at Jack and pointed. He didn't seem to notice at first, so I asked him, "Do you see that guy?" But Jack just brushed it off like it was nothing, telling me I was probably imagining it. "It's just in your head," he said. I didn't believe him. The guy didn't look like he was just standing there. He looked like he was waiting. And there was something about the way he was staring at us that made me feel like we were being watched, like he knew something we didn't. We got in a cab, hoping the night would just end and we could all forget about the weirdness. But it didn't, not by a long shot. Halfway through the ride, Tim suddenly realized something. His phone was gone. At first, he thought he had just misplaced it, maybe left it back at the bar or in the cab. But when he tried calling it, the phone rang, except it wasn't the usual voicemail message. It was a woman's voice. A calm, almost soothing voice that said, "I've been watching you." Tim froze. The air in the cab suddenly felt heavier. He looked over at us, his face pale, and asked if we had heard it too. We all nodded. The woman's voice had come through clear with no static, no weird noises, just calm and unsettling. Tim immediately tried to call his phone again, but this time it went straight to voicemail, just like it normally would. The weird voice hadn't come back. It was like it never happened. But it had. And now we were all on edge. There was no way to explain it. It felt like someone was playing with us, like someone knew exactly where we were and was messing with us for no reason at all. We all sat in silence for the rest of the ride, the tension thick in the air. Tim was constantly checking his pockets, asking us if we'd seen his phone. But none of us had. The whole thing was just off. Like something out of a bad dream, but it was happening to us. When we got to Tim's apartment, the weirdness didn't stop. He searched everywhere, his jacket, his bag, the cab. It was like the phone had just disappeared into thin air. No sign of it, not even a trace. We ended the night in total silence, no one saying much of anything. The whole thing felt wrong. Everything about it, from Lucy's weird experience in the bathroom to the strange guy staring at us, to Tim's phone being mysteriously taken. Nothing made sense, and the worst part was that we couldn't explain it. It felt like we were part of something we didn't understand, and there was no way to get it back to normal. We never saw Tim's phone again. The weirdness faded out of our lives, but the memory never did. Every time I think about that night, I can't help but wonder, who was watching us, and why? It started out as a normal night. My wife Sarah and I decided to go on a double date with her friends Amanda and Tom. We'd been to that diner a few times before, a quiet little spot out on the outskirts of town. The kind of place that had that cozy vibe, with the old school booths and a neon sign that flickered every now and then. Nothing about that evening gave me any reason to expect something weird. It was supposed to be just another relaxed night with good food and conversation. But looking back now, I can tell that something was off the moment we walked in. Tom had always been a bit of a quiet guy, but that night, he was different. He barely said anything as we sat down, only offering short nods when Sarah spoke. I thought maybe he was just tired. He had been working a lot recently, and it wouldn't have been the first time he'd been a little quieter than usual. But it was the way he kept glancing down at his phone under the table, tapping away like he was in some sort of hurry. Sarah noticed too. I could see her eyes darting to him, trying to engage him, but he just kept nodding or muttering one-word answers. Amanda seemed to be a bit more attentive than usual, watching him closely, but we all kept brushing it off. The tension wasn't obvious at first. It was just uncomfortable. Sarah would try to bring up a topic, and Tom would immediately zone out. Even when Amanda said something funny, Tom wouldn't laugh. He just kept his eyes glued to his phone. At one point, I remember Sarah asking if everything was all right, and Tom just nodded without looking up. It felt like there was this invisible wall between him and everyone else, and it started to get to me. I didn't want to make things awkward, so I tried to distract myself by talking to Amanda about work. We'd all laughed and joked a little, but I could tell that Sarah was growing more concerned. It wasn't just that Tom was quiet. He seemed distant in a way that I couldn't quite put my finger on. But then Amanda asked something that completely threw me off. She looked at Sarah, then glanced at Tom and asked, "Have you noticed anything weird about Tom tonight?" At first, I thought she was just being playful. You know how friends are, right? Always making jokes or pointing out things that don't seem important. But when I looked at Sarah's face, I saw that she was genuinely worried. It hit me all at once. Tom had been unusually distant the whole night. The guy we knew wasn't the one sitting across from us. It was like someone else had taken his place, and that someone wasn't interested in being there. I tried to dismiss the thought. Maybe it was just a bad day for him, or maybe something was going on in his life that he didn't want to talk about. But as the night wore on, the unease kept growing. When the check came, we all stood up to leave. That's when things really took a weird turn. Tom refused to drive. I didn't think much of it at first. Sometimes people just don't feel like being behind the wheel. But when he asked Sarah if she could take the wheel, that raised my eyebrows. It wasn't like him. He always insisted on driving, even on nights like this when we were just grabbing dinner and heading home. I could see the tension in Sarah's face too. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look happy about it. We all climbed into the car, and the ride home was incredibly silent. Tom just stared out the window like he was lost in thought. Sarah and I exchanged a couple of glances, but neither of us spoke. I could feel my stomach tightening, that sense of something being wrong just eating away at me. But the worst part came when I checked the rearview mirror. There was a car behind us, and it had been following us for miles. At first, I thought it was just someone going in the same direction, but as we turned onto smaller roads, the car kept right behind us, no matter how many turns we made. It was the same car that had been parked outside the diner. I could just make out the shape of it in the dim light. My heart started pounding in my chest. I didn't say anything to Sarah at first. I didn't want to alarm her, but I could tell she was starting to notice too. I tried to act normal, but the more I glanced at that car in my mirror, the more I started to feel like we were being followed. I made a couple of turns just to see if the car would keep up. It did, every time. The same car, same headlights. The whole ride felt like something out of a bad thriller movie, the kind where the characters don't know they're being watched. But when we finally pulled into our driveway, the car suddenly sped off, taking a sharp turn at the corner. I tried to brush it off as a coincidence, but the whole thing didn't sit right with me. Later that night, when I thought I could finally put it out of my mind, I had overheard something that made my blood run cold. Sarah and I were in the kitchen when we heard Tom and Amanda talking in the living room. Amanda was speaking in a low voice, and I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough to understand. Tom had been getting anonymous texts for weeks, and not just any texts. Messages that said things like, "Don't run away with her," and "You can't hide forever." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was clear now. Tom wasn't just acting strange because he was tired or distracted. He was being threatened, and whoever was sending those texts had been watching him, maybe even stalking him. I think Tom was involved in something shady, something he hadn't told anyone about. And now the person in that car. They were looking for him. It was clear as day now. All the signs had been there, but I hadn't put it together until now. The whole evening, the weirdness, the tension, the feeling of being watched. It all made sense. But what really got to me was the fact that Tom had been hiding something, and we had unknowingly been dragged into it. The dinner, the ride home, the strange car following us. It was all part of something much bigger, something that we had no idea about. So now, every time we go out, I can't help but feel like I'm being watched. It's like that unease never really left. And I can't shake the thought that the person in that car is still out there, still looking for Tom. I don't know what I was expecting when I agreed to go on a double date with my girlfriend Maddie and our friends Kyle and Kylie, but it sure wasn't what actually happened. To be honest, I thought it was going to be a typical night out, grab some food, drink a couple beers, catch up, and just relax. But it quickly turned into something much more awkward and uncomfortable than I could have imagined. I can still feel the tension when I think back to it now, at which I could just call the night off before things got out of hand. It all started when we met up at this new restaurant that Kyle suggested. He'd been talking about it for weeks, and I'll admit, it seemed like a pretty cool spot. A little upscale, but still chill. Maddie and I showed up first, a little early, and I noticed right away that Kylie and Kyle weren't acting like they normally did. Kylie was looking around like she was scanning the place, and Kyle was nervously tapping his fingers on the table. I brushed it off, though. Maybe they were just tired from the week. When they finally sat down, Kylie didn't waste any time. She immediately told the waiter to bring over the menu, and I mean the menu, like everything on it. As in, every appetizer, entree, and dessert. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was just excited to try everything, but then I noticed that Maddie seemed a little uncomfortable. I caught her glancing at me, clearly unsure if we should be doing this. I gave her a quick, reassuring smile, trying to ignore the weirdness that was starting to bubble up. As the waiter took the massive order, I could feel myself starting to tense up. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then it happened. Kylie, without missing a beat, started giving Maddie these pointed cutting looks. At first, it wasn't anything obvious, but as the food started coming to the table, it got worse. She started commenting on how pathetic Maddie's shoes looked, like they were worn out and not even worth the time. Maddie looked down at her shoes, which were just a regular pair of sneakers she'd had for a while. She didn't say anything, just tried to brush it off, but I could see the redness creeping into her cheeks. It was like Kylie was trying to push her buttons. Then it got even worse. Kylie started talking about makeup, making sure to drop comments about how cheap Maddie's makeup looked, like she had just grabbed whatever was on sale at the drugstore. I could feel Maddie getting more and more uncomfortable, but she stayed quiet. I wanted to say something, anything to stop Kylie from digging into her, but I couldn't bring myself to. I mean, I was right there, and yet I felt frozen, almost as if I was watching everything unfold from the outside. Kyle, on the other hand, was barely saying anything. Every time Kylie made a comment, he would look at me, then at the table like he was too embarrassed to speak up. He would shift in his seat or fidget with his phone, but never once stepped in to stop her. It was clear he was uncomfortable too, but he didn't do anything about it. He just sat there, helpless, while Kylie continued to tear Maddie down in the most subtle yet cruel ways. It was like watching a car wreck in slow motion, where I couldn't pull my eyes away from what was happening, but also felt completely powerless to stop it. Maddie kept trying to smile and deflect it, but the whole dinner felt like one awkward moment after another. Kylie would drop another insult about Maddie's clothes or makeup, and then, to make things worse, she'd act like it was a joke. "Oh, I'm just kidding," she'd say, but the way she said it, the tone in her voice, made it clear she wasn't joking. Every word was a jab, and it stung worse because she was making it seem like it was no big deal. The food came out, and we were all digging in, trying to ignore the uncomfortable tension at the table. But I could see the damage being done. Maddie wasn't eating much, just pushing the food around on her plate. I couldn't help but notice the way she was looking at her phone, almost like she was waiting for a distraction to get out of there. Finally, after what felt like hours of forced conversation, it was time to leave. I was relieved the night was finally coming to an end, but then, as we stood up to leave, Kylie dropped another bombshell. She casually mentioned how strange it was that Maddie hadn't put more effort into her appearance for the date. She wasn't loud about it, but the comment was sharp enough that it made everyone at the table go quiet for a second. Maddie's face turned red, and I could see her trying to hold back tears. That's when I finally snapped. I looked at Kyle, who had been completely silent this entire time. "Dude," I said, a little too loudly, "don't you think you should say something? This is getting out of hand." Kyle just looked at me, and for a second, it seemed like he was going to say something. But then he just shrugged and muttered, "She's just joking. Don't worry about it." That was it. I couldn't believe it. Kyle was just letting his girlfriend tear Maddie apart, and not once had he stepped up to defend her. That's when I realized this wasn't just a simple case of a bad date. This was something much deeper. Kylie had no respect for Maddie, and Kyle didn't have the backbone to stop her. The rest of the night was a blur. Maddie and I didn't talk much after that, and Kyle and Kylie didn't seem to care. We said our goodbyes and went our separate ways, but the damage had been done. I could see the hurt in Maddie's eyes, and it made me sick to my stomach. We drove home in silence, and all I could think about was how I should have done something sooner, how I should have stuck up for her when Kylie first started with the insults. That night stuck with me longer than I wanted it to. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering how I let it get so bad. The truth was, Kyle and Kylie weren't the kind of friends we needed in our lives. Maddie deserved better, and I knew I had to make it right. But I couldn't help but wonder how long Kylie had been tearing people down like that, and how many times Kyle had stayed silent. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was going to be a while before I could look at either of them the same way again. Absolutely. Here's the same story with entirely new, unique names. It started off like any other double date, but quickly turned into something I still can't shake off. My wife, Zoe, and I decided to meet up with my old friend, Luke, and his new girlfriend, Tara, for a night at a bar in the city. Luke had been talking up this new spot for a while, claiming the drinks were incredible and the atmosphere was perfect for unwinding. To be honest, I wasn't super excited about it. It sounded a bit too upscale for my taste, but Zoe was all for it, and it had been a while since we hung out with Luke, so we went along with it. We arrived at the bar, and immediately it was clear Luke and Tara weren't exactly on the best terms. They greeted us with a forced smile, but there was tension in the air that I couldn't ignore. The kind of tension you could cut with a knife. I thought maybe it was just the typical awkwardness of a double date, but something felt off. Luke had already cracked open a beer when we arrived, and I could tell right away that something was a little different about him. He wasn't the usual laid-back guy I knew from work. His demeanor was a little more jittery than usual, and as the night went on, it became more and more apparent that the tension between him and Tara was no accident. At first, the conversation was light, and we tried to make small talk, but then things took a sudden turn. Luke started drinking a little more heavily than I'd seen him do in a long time. Tara seemed to notice it too, because she was barely touching her own drink. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Luke began speaking more loudly, slurring his words, and laughing at his own jokes. I could tell Tara was getting uncomfortable, her fidgeting becoming more noticeable. But it wasn't until Luke mentioned his past that the evening truly started spiraling. He began talking about things from his younger years, but then he casually brought up how his relationship with Tara had its issues. It seemed harmless at first, but the more he drank, the more he spilled. Without skipping a beat, Luke started revealing things about his past, things I wasn't expecting him to talk about, let alone confess in front of Tara. He mentioned that he had cheated on her more than once during their relationship, and he said it with such a casual tone that it left all of us in stunned silence. It was like he had completely lost touch with reality. The way he spoke, it was almost as if he was trying to brush it off, like it wasn't a big deal. Tara's face went completely blank at first, and then slowly you could see the anger and hurt build up behind her eyes. So it shot me a look, and I just had to sit there, frozen, not knowing how to react. I wanted to say something, but what do you even say in a situation like that? Tara sat there, motionless, processing what Luke had just said. I felt terrible for her, but what could I do? Luke, clearly oblivious to how badly he messed up, kept drinking and laughing like everything was normal. Then came the explosion. Tara suddenly stood up, knocking her glass over in the process. Her face had turned bright red, and she couldn't contain herself anymore. The look in her eyes was pure fury, and she started yelling at Luke. It was like a switch had been flipped, and suddenly everything that had been building up over the course of their relationship came pouring out. Tara accused him of being disrespectful, of lying to her, of completely disregarding her feelings for all this time. It was like we were watching the entire foundation of their relationship crumble in front of our eyes. Tara was shaking with anger, and Luke was just sitting there, too drunk to even understand what was happening. The rest of us were just sitting in stunned silence, not sure what to do. So tried to intervene, trying to calm Tara down. But it was no use. Tara was beyond angry, and at that point, I think everyone in the bar could hear them. People started looking over, and I could feel the eyes on us. The restaurant staff came over twice, trying to see if everything was okay, but it was too late for that. The damage had been done. Finally, Tara grabbed her things, told Luke she was done, and stormed out of the bar. Luke tried to apologize, but his words came out slurred and meaningless. He staggered behind her, but by then it was clear there was no coming back from this. Zoe and I sat there in a stunned silence, not really knowing how to process what we had just witnessed. The night had started off so casually, and now we were left with the wreckage of what was left of Luke and Tara's relationship. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. We paid the bill, left a tip, and got out of there as quickly as we could. After that night, Zoe and I didn't see Luke or Tara again for a long time. I don't think we even spoke to him at work after that either. It was like the night had changed everything. I'd never expected something like that to happen, especially on a double date. But it did, and it made me wonder how much we really know about the people closest to us. There are nights that start off as perfectly normal, but end up sticking with you long after the last drink. The kind of night where you go out with friends, expecting a simple evening of laughs and good food, but by the end, everything feels off. That's how it went for us the night Natalie and I met Eric and Julia at this bar that felt oddly familiar, even though we'd never been there before. The place was small, cozy even, with dim lighting, and the kind of vibe that makes you feel like you stumbled into a place where everyone knows each other. You know those spots, the ones that feel like a hidden gem, but the moment you walk in, there's something about it that feels like you've been there 100 times before. That's how this bar felt. At first, everything was just like any other casual double date. Natalie and I have been looking forward to hanging out with Eric and Julia for a while, and this place seemed like the perfect spot. We sat down, ordered some drinks, and got into the usual chit-chat. Eric was in good spirits, laughing and joking around with us, and Julia was just as easygoing as usual. Natalie looked so happy to be out of the house for a bit, and was just glad to have a good time. But about halfway through dinner, that's when things started to get weird. Eric's phone rang. He pulled it out of his pocket, looked at the screen, and his whole demeanor changed. 1 second, he was laughing, and the next, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. His face went pale, and his eyes shifted between the screen and the rest of the room, almost like he was trying to figure out if anyone was watching. I thought he was just having a bad moment or maybe dealing with something work-related, but the way he answered the phone was different. He barely said anything, just muttered a few words, and then hung up quickly. The mood shifted almost immediately after that. Eric wasn't the same. He went quiet, barely engaging in conversation. Natally, I tried to keep things light, but it was obvious something was off. He kept his phone in his hand, checking it every few minutes. The whole vibe of the table changed. Julia noticed it too and started looking at Eric like she was worried. We kept asking him if everything was okay, but every time he brushed it off, saying it was nothing. Still, the silence that fell over the table felt heavy, like we were all holding our breath. It didn't help that he kept getting these weird, distracted looks on his face, as if he was trying to read something in the air, or maybe he was just trying to figure out what was wrong. Natalie and I kept glancing at each other, both of us wondering what the hell was going on, but Eric wasn't talking about it. We tried to carry on, but the conversation felt like we were just going through the motions. As the night went on, you know when your gut tells you something's not right, but you can't put your finger on it. That's what I was feeling. I kept stealing glances at Eric. He was so preoccupied with his phone, tapping it every few seconds. At one point, I even saw him glance around the bar like he was looking for someone, but when I looked around, there was no one in particular that stood out. We finished our meal, paid the bill, and started to get up to leave. Just as we were heading toward the door, Eric's phone rang again. This time, though, he didn't answer it. He looked at the screen, his hand hovering over the phone for a moment, and then he turned to Julia, whispered something to her, and immediately started moving toward the door. I couldn't make out what he said, but it was clear something was up. I didn't want to make it awkward, so I tried to play it cool, but I noticed that Julia looked a little shaken too. As we stepped out of the bar, I'd overheard Julia telling Eric, "You shouldn't have answered it." Her tone was soft but serious, and it didn't seem like something you say unless there was more to the story. Of course, at that point, I had no idea what was really going on, but it didn't sit right with me. We all piled into our cars and started heading home. The drive was eerily quiet. Eric was still on his phone, barely speaking. The silence in the car felt oppressive, like everyone was holding their breath. But it was what happened next that really threw me off. As we were driving, I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed a car behind us. It had been tailing us for a few miles, and the thing was, it was the same car I had seen parked outside the bar earlier. I didn't mention it at first. I figured it was just someone going in the same direction. But then the car kept following us, turning down every street we did. It was starting to make me uneasy, so I tried to act normal, like I wasn't paying attention, but I couldn't help it. The car stayed right behind us for the entire drive, and by the time we pulled into our neighborhood, it finally sped off. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling of being watched lingered. We all got out of our cars and went inside. I tried to ask Eric if everything was okay, but he just brushed me off, saying he was tired and didn't want to talk. That was the end of it, or so I thought. The night ended uneventfully, but I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. The next day, Eric called me. He sounded different, like something was weighing heavily on him. He finally admitted that the call he had gotten earlier was from someone who had been threatening him for months. Apparently, this person knew a lot about his past, things Eric hadn't shared with anyone, not even Julia. The whole time, the reason he was acting so strange was because that person had been at the bar that night. He didn't know who they were or how they had found him, but he was certain that the person was watching him. As for the car, Eric said it was definitely connected. The person who had been threatening him had been following them. And even worse, the note that Julia had mentioned earlier, it was just the beginning. Whoever this person was, they were sending messages, and they weren't done with Eric. We never did find out who the caller was or who had been watching us that night, but the whole thing left a mark. There was something about that night that felt wrong, like we were all just pawns in something bigger than any of us could understand. Even now, thinking back on it, I can still feel the weight of that moment. It wasn't just a strange night. It was the start of something much darker that none of us were prepared for. And to this day, I still wonder if we'll ever know the full story behind the call, the car, or the person who was out there watching. It started as a perfect evening out, the kind of night you think will go down as just another great memory. My boyfriend Sam met me, my best friend Emma, and her fiancé Nick at a trendy rooftop bar, the kind with twinkling lights, a cool breeze, and a panoramic view of the city. The atmosphere was laid back, people laughing, clinking glasses, and the usual hum of a good night out. We all had a great time at first. The drinks were flowing, the conversation was light, and everyone seemed in good spirits. But something changed, and it happened quickly. It's funny how you can go from feeling totally at ease to sensing something off without any obvious trigger. We had just settled into a cozy corner booth when Emma and I decided to step away and hit the bathroom together. The line was short, and we were just talking about how nice the night had been when suddenly her phone buzzed. I glanced at her face, and in an instant, I could see the color drain from her cheeks. I knew it wasn't just a normal text. It was something that made her visibly uncomfortable. Emma quickly looked down at her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through whatever message she had received. I tried to sneak a peek at the screen, but she was fast, swiping the message away so I couldn't see. She then locked her phone and stuffed it back in her purse, but her face remained pale and her eyes looked distant. I could tell she was trying to act normal, but there was something in her eyes that told me whatever was going on wasn't just some random work stuff like she claimed. When we got back to the table, I tried to act like nothing had happened, but the vibe was already different. Emma's energy had shifted. She was quieter, less engaged in the conversation. Nick didn't seem to notice. He was busy cracking jokes with Sam and talking about some new project he was working on. Emma kept glancing at her phone, checking it under the table, and then looking around the bar, almost like she was expecting someone. I didn't want to make it awkward, but I couldn't help but notice the tension hanging in the air. It was then that Nick pulled Sam aside for a minute. They were talking quietly, and from the way Sam's expression changed, I could tell it was something serious. Sam, being Sam, is usually pretty laid back, but this time he looked uncomfortable. I couldn't hear what was being said, but the way Nick's voice dropped made me uneasy. Sam nodded and tried to smile it off, but when he came back to the table, he seemed distracted. The night had taken a strange turn, and it felt like we were all trying too hard to pretend everything was fine. Emma kept checking her phone, glancing around nervously, while Nick tried to steer the conversation back to safer topics. I noticed Sam trying to cheer things up, but even his usual jokes didn't seem to land right. It was like everyone was walking on eggshells, afraid to address whatever had shifted in the room. When we finally got up to leave, it was almost a relief. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, but none of us spoke about it. We'd all piled into the car, and I could tell that Sam, who had been pretty chill the whole night, was still uneasy. It wasn't until we were halfway home that Emma broke the silence. She admitted that the text she had gotten was from someone she hadn't told Nick about, a former lover. As she explained it, he had been stalking her for months. At first, I thought she might be exaggerating, but her voice trembled as she spoke, and I could hear the genuine fear in her tone. She had lied to Nick about it because she didn't want to ruin their engagement, didn't want him to think that she had been hiding something from him. But now I could see how the whole night had been an attempt to keep it together while she juggled the weight of this secret. The text had been a warning from this guy, a reminder that he was still watching her. I had no idea how serious it was until she confided in me. She hadn't even told Nick about the stalking, and she was terrified that if Nick found out, it would ruin everything. It felt like the walls were closing in on her. She tried to brush it off, claiming it was just some crazy ex who couldn't let go, but I could tell she was scared. And that's when everything about the night made sense. The tension at the bar, her distracted glances, the way she couldn't seem to relax, it all clicked. She wasn't just worried about some ex, she was scared for her safety. I couldn't believe it. Here I was thinking we were just out for a fun night with friends, but Emma had been hiding something that was clearly eating her up. I didn't know how to process it. And then there was the added weight of Nick not knowing. I could see that she was torn. She wanted to protect him from the truth, but the longer she kept it from him, the harder it was to keep her composure. I could see how it was tearing her apart, and it felt like the night had been one long, uncomfortable game of pretending everything was fine. But it was far from fine. By the time we got back to our apartment, the car ride had been filled with awkward silence, everyone lost in their own thoughts. Sam and I exchanged a few glances, but neither of us knew what to say. I think we were both still processing what Emma had just told me. Nick had no idea, and that was the hardest part. I could tell he loved her, but she was keeping this huge secret from him, and it seemed like the kind of thing that could destroy their relationship if it came out. The rest of the night was a blur. We dropped Emma and Nick off, and the goodbyes felt more strained than usual. I could see that Emma was relieved, but the weight of her secret was still hanging in the air. As soon as the door closed behind them, Sam and I just stared at each other for a moment. We didn't know what to say. It was one of those rare moments when you realize that what seemed like a normal night out had turned into something much darker and more complicated. The truth of the matter was, Emma had been hiding more than just a secret ex. She had been hiding a part of her life that came out, could shatter everything she had with Nick. I knew I had to be there for her, but part of me was scared too. What if this guy wasn't just some ex? What if he was dangerous? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that things had changed, and what started as a fun night out had turned into something none of us would forget. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare Emma was living was only just beginning. My boyfriend Alex and I had been looking forward to a quiet evening at a fancy restaurant with his best friend Kevin and Kevin's girlfriend Rachel. We had picked a nice spot that looked cozy enough to feel intimate, but also sophisticated enough for a date. The kind of place where the lighting is dim, the music is soft, and the waiters are just the right amount of attentive without being overbearing. At first, the evening was going exactly as we hoped. The food was great, the wine was flowing, and the conversation was lighthearted. We laughed about silly things, shared stories about our jobs, and exchanged the usual pleasantries. It felt like a good night out with good friends. That is, until I started noticing something strange. Across from me, Kevin and Rachel had grown unusually quiet. I didn't think much of it at first. Sometimes people get into their own little worlds, right? But then I caught a glimpse of Rachel's face. She was looking down at her plate, picking at her food in a way that felt off. Her jaw was tight, and there was this strange tension in the way she held herself. And Kevin, well, Kevin looked uncomfortable. Not the I don't want to be here kind of uncomfortable, but more like I'm trying to keep something from blowing up kind of uncomfortable. I tried to focus on the conversation with Alex, but my eyes kept drifting to Kevin and Rachel. Rachel had her hand tightly gripped around her glass, her knuckles white. She'd say something, and then Kevin would respond, but it wasn't the usual casual back and forth. The words felt clipped, forced, almost like they were trying to avoid something. Then it happened. I heard Rachel say quietly at first, "You promised, Kevin. I can't keep doing this anymore." The words hit me like a wave, and I felt this sudden unease creep into my stomach. I looked up at Alex trying to gauge if he'd heard it too, but he was busy talking about something else. Kevin didn't say anything right away. He just stared at Rachel, his eyes flicking nervously around the room. He looked like he was trying to figure out how to respond without making things worse, but whatever he was holding back, it wasn't working. Rachel's voice got louder, more insistent. "You promised. You can't just keep doing this, Kevin." Her face was a mixture of anger and sadness, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. Kevin snapped at her. I wasn't expecting it, and I could feel the sudden tension in the air like a cold wind blowing through the restaurant. "You don't understand, Rachel. It's not that simple." He almost shouted it, his voice strained, as if he was trying to keep control of himself but was failing miserably. I could feel my heartbeat pick up speed. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. I was sitting at the table with my boyfriend, trying to enjoy a meal, but it felt like we had become spectators to an argument that wasn't meant for anyone else. The tension was unbearable. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence, but I was frozen. Rachel looked up at him, her face contorted in a mix of frustration and exhaustion. Kevin just sat there, his fists clenched, his face red with anger, but he didn't say anything more. And then, without warning, Rachel got up from the table and stormed off to the bathroom. She didn't even glance at me or Alex, just walked away as if she couldn't stand to be in that moment for another second. The table fell silent. Kevin just sat there, staring at his hands, his face unreadable. I felt like I should say something, but I didn't know what. I didn't know how to react. It felt like we had been thrust into the middle of something so private, so raw, that there was no way out of it. When Rachel returned, she was visibly calmer, but there was this strange air about her. She sat back down without saying a word, and the conversation awkwardly picked up again, but this time it was forced. No one wanted to bring up what had just happened, but the atmosphere had completely shifted. I tried to focus on the rest of the evening, but everything felt off. The tension between Kevin and Rachel lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. We were all pretending that nothing had happened. We finished the meal in awkward silence. The kind of silence where no one really knows what to say, but everyone's pretending that they're okay. When we finally paid the bill and stood up to leave, I couldn't help but notice the way Kevin kept his distance from Rachel. It wasn't the usual playful, affectionate touch. It was as if he was afraid to make the wrong move, afraid of triggering another outburst. The drive home was quiet. Rachel sat in the back seat, staring out of the window, and Kevin sat next to her, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Alex and I exchanged uneasy glances, but we didn't say anything. We didn't know what to say. The whole night had turned into something uncomfortable, and we didn't know how to address it. The next day, I got a call from Rachel. She apologized for the way the evening had gone, her voice tinged with guilt. She said that things had been rough between her and Kevin for a while, but she hadn't wanted to bring it up at dinner. Then she told me something I wasn't expecting to hear. Kevin had been hiding a gambling addiction from her for months, and it was tearing them apart. She'd known about it for a while, but she hadn't wanted to confront him about it, and she certainly hadn't wanted to let anyone else know. The argument at the restaurant had been a result of her reaching her breaking point. I was shocked. I had no idea what was going on beneath the surface. The entire evening had been clouded by their issues, and we had been completely oblivious. Rachel had been trying to keep it together for so long, but it had reached a point where she couldn't hide it anymore. The weight of it all had just exploded in that quiet, intense moment at the table. It was hard to process. Here we had been, having what seemed like a normal evening, but in reality, we had witnessed the unraveling of a relationship. Kevin's gambling problem, Rachel's pain, it all came out in that moment, and we had no idea how to handle it. The entire evening had been a reflection of their hidden struggles, and we were left in the middle, unable to do anything about it. I couldn't help but feel for Rachel. She didn't deserve to be put in that position, and I couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her to carry such a heavy secret for so long. The night had started so simple, but it ended up being one of those moments where you realize that there's always more going on beneath the surface than you could ever know. It wasn't just a double date. It was a window into something darker, something that had been festering quietly for a long time. And I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for the cracks in their relationship to become impossible to ignore. It was supposed to be a fun, laid-back Saturday night. My wife Jenny and I had been talking about going bowling for ages, and when her sister Rachel came into town for the weekend, we figured it would be the perfect way to spend some time together. We got to the bowling alley early, so there weren't too many people around. It felt pretty normal, the kind of atmosphere where you could just relax and have a good time. But man, things definitely took a strange turn. We were all having a blast at first. Rachel was on fire that night, throwing strikes like she was in a competition. Jenny was in a great mood, laughing at all of Rachel's over-the-top celebrations after each shot. I was doing okay, a couple of strikes here and there, but nothing spectacular. It felt like a good night, no pressure, just enjoying each other's company. It was about halfway through the game when things started to get weird. Rachel, as usual, was super energetic. After one of her turns, she jumped up, probably trying to act out some sort of dramatic victory, and ran over to throw her ball again. But here's the thing, Rachel had this habit of getting super hyped up, and she wasn't really paying attention to what she was doing. So instead of walking to the line like she normally did, she just sprinted over there, not even slowing down. In the split second it took for me to realize what was happening, I saw Rachel heading straight for the pin area. Now, anyone who's been bowling knows that this is a huge no-no. The pin area is like a restricted zone. You don't just run into that area ever. But Rachel didn't seem to care. She was so focused on her ball, so caught up in the moment, that she didn't realize she was heading right for the back of the lanes. Jenny and I both looked at each other like, what is she doing? And then we just watched as Rachel kept running. Before we could even stop her, Rachel slid right under the barrier that separates the pin area from the rest of the lane. In a matter of seconds, she was on the other side, stuck behind the machine that sets up the pins. For a moment, there was complete silence. I was frozen in place staring at her, wondering what in the world was going on. Jenny shouted her name, but Rachel didn't answer. It wasn't until I heard the unmistakable sound of something breaking that I snapped out of it. I got up and ran toward the lane, as did Jenny. The silence turned into chaos. The bowling ball Rachel had been holding had rolled off to the side, and we could hear the loud whirring noise of the pin-setting machine starting to malfunction. It sounded like something was jammed, and at first I thought it might just be the machine acting up, but I quickly realized Rachel was stuck. Not just standing there, she was actually wedged between the machine's components. Her arms were stretched out in an awkward way, and she was kicking her legs, trying to free herself, but the more she struggled, the more she seemed to be stuck. Jenny was already on the phone, dialing the staff to get help, but the situation didn't feel like it was going to be an easy fix. It was clear now that Rachel wasn't just stuck in the sense that she'd gotten a little tangled up. This was something way worse. She couldn't move. I could see the panic in her eyes, and even though she wasn't saying anything, I could tell she was freaking out. I've never seen someone look so trapped and helpless in my life. The staff came running over, but by the time they arrived, Rachel's body had started to slip deeper into the gap between the machines. The whole thing was honestly bizarre. The more I watched it unfold, the more I felt like something wasn't right about the whole situation. It's like the whole alley had suddenly gone quiet, just dead silence, except for the noise of Rachel struggling and the grinding sound of the machine. One of the workers, who looked like he'd been there for a while, jumped into action and immediately started calling for the maintenance crew. It took what felt like forever for anyone to actually help Rachel out, and at that point, I was starting to lose track of time. It was only when the lights flickered a little that I realized just how long we'd been standing there waiting. The other bowlers in the alley had started to stare, but no one seemed to know what to do, so they just kept to themselves. Eventually, the maintenance team managed to get Rachel out of the pin area, but it wasn't a clean or easy job. The whole scene was so unsettling. Rachel came out looking disoriented, her clothes covered in dust and some grease from the machine. Her face was pale and she was shaking. But what freaked me out the most was the way she was acting after she was freed. She wasn't saying much. Jenny kept asking her if she was okay, but Rachel just kept nodding, her eyes kind of unfocused. After that, we decided to call it a night. The fun, lighthearted atmosphere had completely disappeared. Jenny and I walked Rachel out to the car, and she was oddly quiet the whole time. It wasn't until we got home, and she was sitting on the couch, still silent, that Jenny finally asked her if she was all right. That's when Rachel spoke up, but what she said still gives me chills to this day. She told us that while she was stuck behind the machine, she saw something. Something moving. She said she could hear whispers like faint voices that didn't make any sense, and she swore she saw a figure moving just out of her peripheral vision. Of course, Jenny and I were both a little freaked out by this, but Rachel was insistent. She said it wasn't just a trick of the light, and it wasn't her imagination. There was someone or something back there with her. I didn't know what to make of it. Was she still shaken up from being trapped, or was there something more to what she was saying? We tried to shrug it off, thinking maybe she was just panicking, but it didn't sit right with me. I kept thinking about that weird moment when the machine started malfunctioning, and how everything seemed to go quiet, like the alley itself was holding its breath. Needless to say, I haven't been to that bowling alley since, and Rachel's never mentioned it again. But the whole thing still bothers me. Something wasn't right that night, that maybe there was more to it than just a random accident. Something about the way the lights flickered, how time seemed to stand still, it all just felt wrong. And Rachel. Well, she's been a lot more distant ever since that night, like she's carrying something with her. Something that happened in that pin area she's not ready to talk about. But whatever it is, I don't think it's over yet. I'm honestly still not sure what happened that night. I mean, you ever have one of those moments where things just go south so fast you can't even process what's happening until it's too late? That was me on this double date with my girlfriend Amzi, my buddy Jason, and his girlfriend Kate. What was supposed to be a fun evening out turned into something. I don't even know how to explain it. It was like a nightmare but real, and I'm still cringing when I think about it. It all started when Jason and Kate invited us out to this nice little bistro downtown. You know the type, dim lights, cozy tables, everyone in a good mood, and the food's pretty decent. Honestly, I was looking forward to it. A nice, low-key evening with good company, some wine, and maybe a little bit of lighthearted conversation. That's all I wanted. But Amzi. Well, Amzi had other plans. When we first sat down, everything seemed fine. We were all joking around, laughing about this ridiculous story Jason had about a failed hiking trail. The vibe was easy, and I couldn't have been more relaxed. But then Amzi started acting a little different. At first, I thought I was imagining things. She was quieter than usual, which is rare for her, but I figured maybe she was just a little tired. But soon, I started noticing the little things. She was being a little snappier with me. Like, if I said something funny, she wouldn't laugh. She'd just stare at me like I was some kind of alien. And when I asked her if she was okay, she'd say something like, "Yeah, I'm fine," but with this weird edge to it. Still, I tried to shake it off. Maybe she was in a weird mood, or maybe I was just overthinking it. But then it got worse. The food came out, and everything was going pretty smoothly at first. Jason and Kate were talking about some new movie they had seen, and I was still trying to make small talk with Amzie. That's when she started acting strange. I remember she started chewing loudly, like unreasonably loudly. It was kind of a turn off. I could feel myself getting embarrassed. I looked over at Jason, and he was trying not to notice, but I could tell Kate was uncomfortable too. But that was just the beginning. It was like, all of a sudden, Amzie was a completely different person. At first, I thought maybe she was just nervous or something. As the night went on, it became clear she wasn't just having an off moment. This was a full-on breakdown. Out of nowhere, Amzie let out this ridiculously loud burp. And I mean loud. Not just a casual little excuse me type of burp, but one that felt like it shook the entire room. The table went silent. Jason's face went red, and Kate looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. I sat there frozen, not knowing what to do. It was beyond awkward. And it didn't stop there. Amzie just sat there, smiling like it was no big deal. And then, without warning, she started scratching her backside, right there at the table. I'm not talking about a casual little scratch either. She was digging into it like she was trying to reach her spine or something. I honestly couldn't believe my eyes. I wanted to crawl under the table and just vanish. But no, instead, I was stuck there pretending like everything was normal while the whole evening went from bad to worse. I glanced at Jason, and I could see he was just as shocked as I was. His eyes were wide, and he kept shifting uncomfortably in his seat. I'm pretty sure Kate was about to ask if she could go to the bathroom just to escape the chaos. I looked at Amzie, and for the first time that night, I felt embarrassed to be with her. I didn't know what had come over her. She was always bold, confident, but never like this. Something was off. But what? Was she doing this on purpose? Was she mad at me? I couldn't figure it out. The worst part was that no matter how many times I tried to steer the conversation back to something normal, Amzie just kept. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like she was trying to turn the evening into a joke. When I asked her if everything was okay, she just shrugged it off, giving me this weird look like I was the one who was acting out of line. I kept trying to get us back to a normal rhythm, but it felt like everything I said was being undermined by her behavior. Every time I tried to smooth things over, Amzie would either interrupt or say something even weirder. She started commenting on the weirdest things, like the salt shaker being too salty or how the water was too wet. At one point, she even commented on how overrated the bread basket was. And then, as if it couldn't get worse, she made this random, awkward comment about me being so sensitive, which I knew wasn't a compliment. At that point, I just wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. I tried to make eye contact with Jason, silently pleading for some kind of escape route. But he was too busy trying to ignore what was happening, probably hoping this would blow over. The whole night felt like a train wreck. I was the one sitting in the front car with no way to get off. When we finally left the restaurant, I couldn't even look at her. Amzie was still acting like everything was fine, but I could feel the tension between us, thick and suffocating. Jason and Kate didn't say much during the ride home, but I could tell they were both relieved the evening was finally over. As we pulled up to our place, I didn't know whether to get out and scream or just go inside and pretend it never happened. As soon as we got inside, Amzie seemed to snap back into her normal self, like nothing had happened at all. She was laughing and joking around like the weird, embarrassing behavior had been some kind of joke. I was just supposed to laugh along with it, but I couldn't. I couldn't forget how she had humiliated me in front of my best friend and his girlfriend. That night, I slept on the couch. Amzie didn't even seem to notice. I don't know what happened to her that night or why she acted that way. I've been trying to figure out if she was just messing with me or if something deeper was going on. But one thing's for sure, I'm never going bowling with her again. And if Jason and Kate ever bring out that night, I'm just going to pretend it never happened. Some things are better left forgotten. You ever just know you've made a mistake, but you can't pinpoint when exactly it happened? That was me, the night I went on a mystery double date with my friend Namel. It started off normal enough, but let me tell you, the way things went down was anything but normal. It was one of those nights where everything felt off, but it wasn't until it was too late that I realized how deep in I was. So, here's how it all started. Namel and I hadn't hung out in a while, and he suggested we meet up for a double date. I don't know, maybe I was feeling a little bored. Maybe I was curious about meeting his friends, but whatever it was, I agreed. I should have known something was up when he said the plans were a bit mysterious. That should have been a red flag, but of course, I was just like, yeah, whatever, and went along with it. When I met up with Namel and his date, things seemed totally normal at first. His friends, a couple he didn't really know all that well, were cool, and we hit it off right away. We chatted a bit, made small talk, and then they suggested we head to this bar they claimed was undiscovered by most people. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I look back and realize that everything about that place screamed offbeat and weird. We got to the bar, and from the outside, it looked like your typical dive spot, kind of hidden away in the corner of the city. Nothing fancy, just an old neon sign, a few mismatched tables, and some dim lighting. The air inside was thick with the smell of cheap whiskey and sweat. I'm not a huge drinker, but I thought, why not? It's a double date, and we're out having fun. I was still talking to the girls sitting next to me when they ordered drinks. I'm not sure exactly what happened after that, but they gave me a drink, a cocktail that looked normal enough. I was just trying to go along with the flow. I took a sip, then another, and things started to get hazy. That's the last clear thing I remember, sitting there laughing, talking, and feeling my eyelids get heavier. The next thing I knew, everything went black. I woke up in a dark, unfamiliar place. At first, I had no idea where I was, just that I was lying down on something cold and hard. My head felt like it was split open, and there was this pounding in my skull. I tried to sit up, but everything around me was spinning. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. Then it hit me. I had been drugged. I don't know how, I don't know why. There was no other explanation. I fumbled for my phone to check the time, but as soon as I pulled it out, I noticed something was off. I checked my wallet. Gone. My card. Gone. My ID. Gone. I felt a cold rush of panic flood over me as I checked my pockets. Nothing. I'd been robbed. Now, I've been in some shady situations in my life, but nothing like this. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like jelly. I looked around the dimly lit room I was in, bare concrete walls, a few old chairs in the corner, and a single light flickering above me. This wasn't the bar we'd been at. It wasn't even close. The room had an almost industrial feel to it, like it wasn't even meant for people. I scrambled to my feet, still disoriented, and tried to gather my bearings. The immediate thought that hit me was that I had to find my stuff, and fast. I stumbled out of the room and into a narrow hallway that stretched further than I could see. I heard muffled voices up ahead, so I crept toward them, hoping to find someone who could explain what was happening. As I walked, the hallway seemed to stretch on forever. The walls were lined with old, faded posters, none of which made any sense to me. They were all black and white, with strange symbols and words that seemed to blur together. The more I looked at them, the more I started to feel nauseous. Finally, I rounded a corner, and there they were, Namel and his friends, sitting at a table like nothing had happened. They looked completely at ease. At first, I thought I was still hallucinating, but as I moved closer, the sight of them sitting there, smiling, laughing, just made my skin crawl. Something was terribly wrong. I walked toward them, but no one noticed, not a single glance in my direction. I called out to them, but my voice was drowned by this strange buzzing sound in my ears. The whole room seemed off. I finally made my way over to Namel, but when I tapped his shoulder, he didn't even flinch. He was like a mannequin. His eyes were glazed over, and his expression was completely blank. I shook him, but there was no response. My heart was pounding now, and my stomach dropped into my feet. What the hell was going on? That's when I saw it. On the table between them was my wallet. But it wasn't just mine. There were two wallets, both of ours, mine and Jason's, and the one that wasn't mine, his was open, empty. I felt my blood run cold. My entire world came crashing down in that moment. I was starting to piece it together now. We'd been drugged. The whole thing had been a setup. But why? Why had I been targeted? Why had they taken everything from me? I felt this overwhelming sense of dread sink in as I realized I might never get the answers I needed. I turned around and started walking quickly now down the hallway, trying to find a way out. I could feel the sweat beating on my forehead. The walls seemed to close in on me. Every footstep echoed in the silence, and the buzzing in my ears was deafening. I had no idea where I was. I had no idea who I could trust. All I knew was that I had been played, and whatever game was being run here, I was not going to be its victim. I finally found an exit door, stumbled out into the cold night air, and didn't look back. My wallet was gone. My trust was gone. But one thing was clear. I was never going back to that bar, and I sure as hell wasn't trusting anyone who invited me there again. There's something about camping that's supposed to be peaceful, right? The crackling of the fire, the stars overhead, the sounds of nature. The idea is to unplug from the chaos of everyday life and just enjoy the simplicity of being out in the woods with the people you care about. That's what I thought anyway. But this trip, the one with my best friend Gary, his wife Sandra, and my own wife Anna, turned into something that's hard to forget. It went from the typical laughs around the campfire to something, well, something that felt like we were in the middle of a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. We'd set up our tents in a secluded spot near a creek, a perfect little corner of the woods that felt miles away from civilization. We spent the day hiking, fishing, and cooking over the fire. The usual camping stuff. The weather was perfect too, clear skies, crisp air, and the kind of quiet that made you feel like you were in your own little world. Even after dark, when we sat around the fire with our drinks, things were easygoing. I'd made some s'mores, Anna was laughing at one of Gary's dumb stories, and Sandra seemed content, even if she was a little quieter than usual. But as the night went on, I started noticing something weird. It wasn't anything obvious at first. The air felt colder and more still. The fire crackled, but the sound of the forest was unusually quiet. The usual chirping of insects and rustling of animals had faded away. At first, I thought maybe I was just getting paranoid, or maybe it was just a cold playing tricks on my mind. But then I saw it, just a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, right near the edge of the trees. I didn't say anything to anyone, figuring it was just a deer or something, but the unease lingered. Then it happened. Gary and Anna were talking about something. I wasn't really paying attention when Sandra let out a scream that sent a jolt straight through me. I didn't know if she was laughing, crying, or actually scared, but whatever it was enough to make everyone stop dead in their tracks. She was staring into the darkness just beyond the light of the fire, her face pale, her eyes wide with something I couldn't name. I thought maybe she'd just seen a bear or some other animal, but then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said she saw a hand. Not just any hand, though. She said it was the hand of a witch. I'm not kidding. She actually said witch, like she was dead serious, not joking around. The way she said it, you could tell she wasn't messing with us. There was real fear in her voice. I remember glancing over at Gary, who looked just as confused as I was. Anna squeezed my arm, probably thinking the same thing I was, that maybe Sandra was just having a moment. Like sometimes happens when you're out in the woods, your mind starts playing tricks on you. But Sandra wasn't backing down. She was adamant. She said she had seen a hand reaching out from the darkness, long, thin fingers stretching toward her. She described it as wrinkled and twisted, like something not human. She said the fingers looked like they were beckoning her, and that when she looked closer, she saw a face. Now, I'm not one to believe in supernatural stuff. I mean, yeah, I get creeped out by a good horror movie, but that's all it is, movies. But when Sandra started describing this thing, I'll admit, something about it felt off. She wasn't exaggerating or making it into some dramatic campfire story. She was genuinely freaked out. At first, we all tried to convince her that she was just imagining things. The dark can mess with your mind, especially in the woods. We joked about it to lighten the mood, but it didn't help. Sandra's grip on her cup tightened, and she wouldn't let go of it, eyes darting to the trees every time the wind rustled the branches. We decided to try to make the best of it, like you do when someone's freaking out during a camping trip. But there was this palpable tension now, hanging in the air like a thick fog. Everyone was on edge. We huddled a little closer around the fire, and every time a twig snapped in the distance, we jumped. But then, just as things seemed to calm down, we heard it. A faint, eerie whispering from the edge of the woods. It was soft at first, like the wind playing tricks on us. But it wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate. It sounded like words, but not in any language I recognized. It was strange. Cold. It crawled up your spine like something was trying to reach inside you. I looked at Gary, and his face had gone pale too. Anne's eyes were wide, and I could feel her hand grip mine tighter. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I was starting to feel it too, the feeling of being watched, the feeling that something wasn't right. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just animals, or maybe our minds were playing tricks on us. But the more we sat there, we weren't alone. And Sandra Sandra was practically in a panic. She kept whispering that she felt something out there, something following us. She said she could see it just beyond the trees, lurking in the shadows. After what felt like an eternity of tense silence, Gary finally stood up, looking around the campsite. He was clearly trying to stay calm, but even he couldn't hide the anxiety in his voice when he said we should pack up and head inside. But when we stood up to gather our things, that's what happened. The whispering stopped, and the woods went completely silent. Not a single sound. Nothing. We all looked at each other, frozen. Then we heard it. A sharp crack from the woods, like a branch snapping underfoot. But no one was out there. We were too freaked out at that point to even think about staying outside. We quickly made our way into the tents, huddling together, trying to stay as quiet as possible. No one said a word. I don't think any of us slept that night. Every creak of the tent, every rustling outside made us jump. The next morning, when the sun came up, it all felt a little more normal. But the dread didn't go away. We packed up our camp and got out of there fast. As we drove away from the campsite, I couldn't help but keep looking back at the trees, half expecting something to be watching us from the shadows. Sandra didn't say much after that night. She seemed shaken and honestly so were the rest of us. We never talked about it again. It was one of those things we just tried to forget. But every time I'm out in the woods now, I can't forget that something is out there waiting. And sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear whispers in the trees. Maybe Sandra wasn't just imagining things. I don't know. But I don't think I'll ever look at the woods the same way again. I don't know if you've ever had one of those nights that feels completely off from the start, but you can't put your finger on why. Everything seems fine at first, but the longer the night goes on, the more things just don't add up. That's how it felt when I went on a double date with my longtime friend Laura and her boyfriend Peter. Laura and I hadn't seen each other in a while, and she'd suggested we catch up over dinner. We picked a small family-owned restaurant that Peter had apparently chosen. From the outside, it looked like any other cozy little spot. Nothing fancy, but warm, inviting, and the kind of place where you could expect some quiet, good food and conversation. I thought it was going to be one of those easygoing evenings, the kind that makes you feel comfortable and happy, reconnecting with old friends. But that wasn't how it turned out. I remember walking into the restaurant, the faint smell of garlic and herbs hitting me as soon as the door opened. The place was quiet, a few people scattered around, talking in low voices. It seemed like a perfect spot for a catch-up. Laura and I hadn't hung out in months, so we were excited to spend some time together. Peter, who I had only met a couple of times, seemed nice enough, though I couldn't help but notice that his energy was a little off from the start. As soon as we sat down, Peter's phone rang. He didn't even hesitate to pick it up, stepping away from the table as he answered it. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was business or something else important. But after a few minutes, I saw him stiffen, his body language tense. He was pacing near the door, speaking in low, clipped tones, and there was something about it that felt wrong. I glanced at Laura, who seemed unaffected, but I noticed the nervous edge in her eyes. She kept glancing at Peter like she wasn't sure what to make of it either. When Peter came back, he didn't sit down right away. He lingered by the table, fiddling with his phone, his face completely neutral, almost robotic. This was the guy I'd met before. The Peter I'd met a couple of times had been charming, quick to laugh, the kind of guy who would have easily kept the conversation flowing. But tonight, he seemed like a completely different person. He barely said a word as he slid into his seat, and the silence that followed felt way too thick for comfort. Laura, sensing the awkwardness, tried to steer the conversation to light topics. She asked me about work, how things were going, and I could see her trying to pull us out of whatever funk had settled over the table. But every time she spoke, Peter would just zone out, staring at his plate or looking out the window. It was like he wasn't even there. At one point, he snapped at me when I asked about something work-related, his voice sharp and tense. I was taken aback, but I didn't say anything. Maybe he was having a bad day. But then it happened. As we sat there, trying to push through the silence, Peter's eyes suddenly locked onto mine, and for the first time all evening he spoke. And when he did, he let it slip. The words that came out of his mouth changed everything. He started talking about how he'd been working with his father and how it had become a mess, a big one. He told me he had been involved in a business that was borderline illegal, something his family had been pressuring him to do whatever it takes to protect. The words hung in the air like an anchor. My stomach sank. I looked at Laura, who was suddenly frozen, her eyes wide in disbelief. She hadn't known any of this. Peter's secret life, the shady stuff his family had roped him into, was something she had no idea about. I could see the pain in her eyes, the shock that he kept this from her for so long. It was clear that she was just as blindsided as I was. Peter's face was pale now, and his voice trembled a bit as he continued. I could tell he wasn't proud of what he was saying, but it felt like he had no choice but to admit it. The weight of the confession hung heavy between us, and I could feel the air in the restaurant change. It was like everyone in the place could sense the shift, the quiet tension that had taken over our table. Laura, trying to process everything, just stared at Peter. I could tell she was hurt, confused, and angry all at once. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, watching the mess unravel in front of me. The restaurant, once a cozy spot for a relaxing dinner, now felt claustrophobic. The walls seemed to close in on us, and the quiet hum of the place was too loud, too oppressive. The clinking of silverware, the soft murmur of other diners, it all faded into the background as the realization set in. We were caught in something we didn't want to be a part of. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Laura kept trying to lighten the mood, asking about the weather or offering awkward small talk, but it wasn't the same anymore. Peter wasn't the same, and neither were we. The night that had started with excitement and laughter was now riddled with tension and unease. I couldn't help but feel like we had been pulled into something way bigger than any of us had bargained for. When the check came, I was ready to leave. There was no point in pretending that things were okay. We'd all stood up in silence. As we walked out to the parking lot, I saw Peter step aside to take another phone call. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but the look on his face was enough. His jaw was clenched, his eyes darting around like he was being watched. There was something off about the way he moved, like he was constantly on edge, waiting for something to happen. That was the last time I saw him. A few days later, I found out that Laura had broken up with Peter. She had learned more about his past, about the family business he had been involved in, and she couldn't handle it. She told me she had no idea who the person she had been dating really was. And to be honest, I couldn't blame her. What Peter had confessed, what he had been hiding, was something that didn't just disappear with a couple of apologies. Looking back, I can't help but feel like that night was a turning point. Like it was the moment when everything started to unravel, and the truth about Peter's life came crashing down. I never saw him again after that night, and Laura and I have barely talked about him since. It's strange how someone can be so close to you, and then just like that, they're gone. The weight of what happened at that dinner still hangs with me, though. It's like there's this invisible thread that ties me back to that night, and every time I think about it, I can't help but wonder just how deep Peter's secrets really went. I'll never forget that night. It was supposed to be just another casual double date, a nice dinner with my buddy Will and his girlfriend Megan. We hung out together a few times before, but that night, something felt off from the start. Maybe it was the way Will seemed tense, or the way Megan took control of everything like she was running the show. I didn't think much of it at first, but as the night went on, it got worse and worse. We met at a new Italian place in the city. Nothing fancy, just a cozy spot with brick walls and low lighting. The kind of place where you could hear the chatter from other tables, but still have enough space to feel like you were having your own little dinner party. Will and I had been friends for years, so I knew how he usually was. Chill, easygoing, not the type to sweat the small stuff. Megan, though, had only met a few times. She was nice enough, but there was always something about her that rubbed me the wrong way. She was the kind of person who always had an opinion on everything, and tonight, it was like she was on a mission to tell Will exactly what to do every second. From the moment we sat down, I noticed it. Megan was the one picking the wine, telling Will what to eat and how to dress. At first, I thought maybe it was just for being a little controlling, but as the night went on, I started to notice how uncomfortable Will was. He'd laugh it off at first, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was trying to avoid eye contact. It wasn't like him to be so quiet. Normally, he would have made a joke or brushed it off, but tonight, it was like something was weighing on him. And then it happened. A tipping point. Will had ordered a plate of lasagna, and Megan immediately jumped in, telling him he shouldn't order something so heavy because he was already eating too much. Will tried to brush it off, but I could see his frustration growing. It was like she was treating him like a child. I could almost feel the air change. Will's face turned slightly red, and for the first time that night, he snapped. He told her she didn't have the right to tell him what he could or couldn't eat. It wasn't even the fact that he snapped at her. It was the way he did it. It was as if he was finally letting everything out. Megan, of course, didn't take kindly to that. She immediately started yelling that Will was lazy and didn't take anything seriously. The whole vibe of the table shifted. It wasn't playful bickering anymore. It was like they were both trying to tear each other down with every word they said. At first, I tried to laugh it off. I thought maybe it was just one of those things that would blow over. But it didn't. The argument only escalated. Will started calling Megan controlling, passive-aggressive, and told her she was always putting him down. And Megan, she just kept going, telling him he was useless and wouldn't amount to anything if he didn't change. The insults started flying, and I just sat there, caught in the middle, unsure if I should step in or let them hash it out. I looked over at my girlfriend, Kiki, who was sitting quietly next to me. She had this concerned look on her face, and I could tell she was just as uncomfortable as I was. There was no way to ignore it now. Their fight was loud, and we weren't the only ones who noticed. People from the other tables were starting to glance over at us, some looking uncomfortable, others just downright curious about what was going on. And then Megan did something I didn't expect. In the middle of their yelling match, she grabbed her drink, one of those fancy cocktails, the kind with a fruit garnish and a straw, and without warning threw it right at Will. The glass shattered on his chest, the drink splattering everywhere. I've never seen someone so angry in my life. Will just sat there, stunned, soaked with the remnants of her drink, looking like he didn't know how to react. For a second, the entire restaurant was silent, like everyone was holding their breath. Megan stormed out, not looking back. Will didn't move at first. He just sat there in shock, staring at the spot where she had been sitting. I turned to Kiki, and we both exchanged a look. There was nothing more to say. The mood had completely shifted, and it was obvious that we weren't going to salvage the evening. I wanted to say something to Will, but the guy just looked defeated. He didn't even seem to care about the ruined dinner, the mess, or the people staring. All he could do was sit there, trying to piece together what had just happened. The rest of the night passed in silence. Will didn't say anything for the rest of the meal. Kiki and I tried to make small talk, but it felt pointless. The energy in the room was thick, and I could tell Will wasn't in the mood to be around people. The vibe was just off. When the check came, we didn't stick around for dessert. Will didn't even seem to notice it was time to go. We paid, left the restaurant, and I walked him out to his car. After that night, things with Will and Megan fell apart quickly. They never really talked after that, and Will didn't seem to want to reach out. It's like that dinner was the final straw in their relationship. I can't say I was surprised. After seeing the way they fought, I kind of saw it coming. But witnessing it unfold like that was still jarring. And now when I think back to that night, I can't help but wonder if that dinner wasn't just a bad date, but a glimpse into everything that was wrong between them. I've been looking forward to this double date for weeks. It wasn't a huge deal or anything, just a casual get-together with some friends. My buddy James, who was always up for anything, invited me out with his coworker Kate and her boyfriend Brian. They'd been dating for a while, but I didn't know much about Brian. All I heard from Kate was that he was a bit of a strong personality, whatever that meant. And some coworkers had quietly mentioned that he had a temper, but Kate would always brush it off like it was nothing. We'd heard about this new bar that opened downtown, and it was supposed to have the best cocktails in the city. Naturally, that was where we decided to go. The place had a cool vibe, dim lighting, sleek furniture, and a bar that wrapped around the entire room. It felt trendy, like the kind of place you'd only go to on a special occasion. The music was loud enough to give the atmosphere some energy, but it wasn't so loud that you couldn't talk to the person sitting next to you. At first, things seemed like they were going smoothly. We all ordered drinks and was catching up with Kate about work. She was talking about a project she'd been working on. I was half listening, half watching the crowd. As we sipped our cocktails, it felt like any other night out with friends. Nothing strange, just the usual banter and laughs. But as the night went on, it quickly became clear that something wasn't quite right with Brian. It started when Kate ordered a drink that wasn't on the menu. I didn't think much of it at first. People do that all the time, right? But Brian's reaction was off. He was sitting next to Kate and didn't even look at her when he snapped at the bartender. The bartender, caught off guard, tried to explain that the drink wasn't on the menu, but Brian wasn't having any of it. The whole bar seemed to quiet down a bit, and the tension in the air felt like it thickened instantly. Kate looked embarrassed, but she just apologized and tried to laugh it off like it was no big deal. Brian didn't seem to care much about her apology, though. He just went quiet after that. The rest of the night felt weird after that moment. Brian barely said a word. He didn't even seem to be enjoying the food or the drinks. He had his arms crossed, and I caught him glaring at Kate every once in a while, like he was waiting for her to do something wrong. Kate, on the other hand, was trying her best to act normal. She would smile at the table, but I noticed that her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. She seemed a little too tense, and it didn't take long for me to realize that something was off. Around halfway through the dinner, I noticed Kate's hands were shaking under the table. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every time she lifted her glass or reached for the bread basket, I saw her hands tremble just slightly. It wasn't like her at all. We'd worked together for months, and I'd never seen her act like this. She was always so calm and collected, but now she looked like she was walking on eggshells. And when she would try to make small talk, her voice wasn't as confident as it usually was. The whole situation felt weird. It was like Brian was getting more and more agitated with each passing minute. First, it was the drink thing, then the silence, and now he was scowling at Kate for no real reason. I could see that she was getting uncomfortable, but she wasn't saying anything. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I finally asked her if everything was okay. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I definitely wasn't prepared for the confession she gave me. Kate leaned in close, glancing at Brian, who was still staring at his plate like he was about to explode. And she whispered to me that things had been bad with Brian for a while now. She told me that he had become increasingly controlling, and that the whole night was just another example of how he would get upset over the smallest things. She said he didn't like it when she made decisions without asking him first, even something as simple as ordering a drink at a bar. But it was more than just that. She confided in me that he'd been isolating her from her friends, telling her that she didn't need to see people outside of him and his family. It was becoming more obvious by the day, but she hadn't figured out how to get out of it. The weight of what she was telling me hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd known Kate for a while now, and she was always the strong one, the one who held it all together. To hear that she was stuck in an emotionally controlling relationship was beyond disturbing. I could see it now, the way she'd been trying to laugh off the awkwardness, the way she'd been trying to hide her discomfort. The whole evening had gone from fun and lighthearted to dark and tense. As if on cue, Brian stood up and stormed off toward the door. He didn't say a word to anyone, and it felt like the whole room exhaled when he left. Kate sat there for a moment, staring at the empty chair where he had been sitting, her face pale and her hands still shaking. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't exactly tell her what I was thinking. How Brian's behavior had made me uncomfortable too. It wasn't the time for that. Instead, I just sat with her, not saying much, but offering what little comfort I could. The rest of the night was a blur. I couldn't help but feel like we'd been dragged into something we weren't supposed to see. We finished our drinks and left not long after, but I knew things were far from over. Kate had clearly reached a breaking point, and I wasn't sure how long she could keep pretending everything was fine. I just wanted her to get out of it, to get away from Brian before it got worse. The next week, Kate broke up with him. I didn't ask her for the details. I didn't need to. I knew what had been happening, and I knew it was the right thing for her to do. But that night, that double date, that left a mark. It wasn't just the tension or the awkward silences. It was seeing the person you thought you knew unraveling in front of you, and realizing that what he thought was just a night out with friends had been something far darker all along. It was one of those nights where everything seemed perfect on the surface, but there was a gnawing feeling in the back of my mind that something wasn't quite right. Emily and I were looking forward to this double date with my old friend Brian and his new girlfriend Claire. We hadn't seen Brian in a while, so I was curious to meet the girl he was dating. From what I heard, Claire seemed nice, and I figured we'd have a fun, casual evening at one of those trendy Mexican restaurants that everyone had been raving about. The place was packed, the aroma of fresh tacos and sizzling fajitas filling the air as we made our way to the table. It was one of the spots where the decor was colorful, with giant murals of Mexican landscapes and skulls painted on the walls. The energy was lively, and the clinking of glasses added to the vibe. We were seated in a cozy cornered booth where we could all easily chat without too much distraction. The lighting was dim, the music upbeat, and everything seemed set up for a good time. At first, everything was going smoothly. We were catching up, laughing, and the conversation flowed easily. Brian was his usual self, cracking jokes about random things, while Claire smiled politely, chiming in every now and then. Emily and I hadn't seen Brian in months, so we were both happy to reconnect. It felt like the old days, the easy times before everyone got so busy with their own lives. But as the night went on, things started to shift in a way that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't immediately obvious, but the first sign was when Brian made a joke about Claire's appearance. At first, I didn't think much of it. He made some offhand comment about how she had ordered something basic from the menu, which was clearly meant to be a harmless tease. I've known Brian for years, and he's always been one for joking around. But when I looked over at Claire, her expression had completely changed. She didn't laugh. Her face, which had been relaxed and open just moments before, suddenly hardened. The silence that followed was palpable. Brian seemed to realize his mistake too late, trying to brush it off with a nervous laugh. But Claire didn't look like she was going to let it go. Instead of brushing it off like I thought she would, she snapped. She started accusing Brian of being disrespectful, of constantly belittling her. It caught me off guard. I'd never seen Brian act like that before, and I could see that Emily was also confused by the sudden shift. The tension in the air grew thick, and we all sat there, unsure of how to handle it. At first, I thought it was just a small argument, something that would blow over. But the more Claire spoke, the more it became clear that there were deeper issues bubbling beneath the surface. She wasn't just upset about the joke. It was like she'd been holding something back, and now it was all coming out at once. She started comparing Brian to her ex, saying he was nothing like the man she wanted to be with. I could see the anger in her eyes, and for the first time, I felt like I was intruding on something personal. Brian was defensive, but he didn't seem to have the words to calm her down. He just kept repeating that she was overreacting and that she was too sensitive. I felt awkward sitting there, unsure if we should intervene or just let them work it out. But the argument wasn't slowing down. It was escalating fast. Brian's voice was getting louder, and Claire was practically shaking with frustration. Emily and I exchanged glances, both of us unsure of what to do. Emily made a small attempt to calm the situation, but it didn't help. Claire's anger was only growing, and the entire table felt the shift. Brian's temper was something I'd heard rumors about before, but this was different. This wasn't just a small disagreement. It was turning into something ugly. The situation only got worse. Claire wasn't backing down, and Brian's irritation was becoming more visible. I could feel the heat rising in the air around us, like everything was spiraling out of control. Claire snapped at me, saying I was just as bad as Brian for letting him talk to her like that. I sat there stunned, unsure of how to respond. It felt like I was suddenly part of the problem, even though all I was trying to do was sit through an awkward dinner. Emily, equally stunned, tried to reassure her, but it didn't seem to make a difference. The words were out there, and the damage had been done. By this point, the restaurant staff had noticed what was happening and came over twice, trying to defuse the situation. They offered to move us to another table or bring us more drinks, but the damage had already been done. I could tell the staff was uncomfortable, and honestly, I didn't blame them. They were just trying to keep the peace in a place that was supposed to be a fun, casual night out. But this was no longer fun. The silence that followed after their second attempt at calming things down was deafening. Claire and Brian exchanged heated looks, and it was clear that neither of them were willing to back down. After what felt like an eternity of tension, Brian finally stood up and muttered something under his breath, walking out of the restaurant in a huff. Claire quickly followed him, not even looking back at us. The door swung shut behind them, and Emily and I were left sitting there in disbelief. The restaurant suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. The energy was completely gone, and we were left with the awkward remnants of the fight that had just unfolded. We sat in stunned silence for a few moments, both of us unsure of what to say. What had just happened? How had the night gone so wrong so quickly? We left the restaurant soon after, both of us still processing what had just happened. As we walked to the car, Emily and I discussed what we'd witnessed, both of us feeling shaken by how quickly everything had escalated. We had just witnessed something deeper than just an argument, a glimpse into a toxic relationship that was only going to get worse. Brian and Claire's breakup didn't come as a surprise to anyone, but the memory of that night lingered. It was like the entire evening had been a warning, a sign that something wasn't right between them. After that night, we never saw Brian again. Claire tried to reach out to Emily a few times, but it wasn't the same. The cracks in their relationship were too deep, and that night we had all seen them in full view. The night that started with simple laughter and good drinks ended with a window into something darker, and it was a moment neither of us would ever forget. I'd never thought a simple double date could turn into something so uncomfortable that looking back, I should have known better. It was one of those nights where everything seemed perfectly fine on the surface, but you could feel something lurking underneath. My friend Aaron had invited me to meet up with him and his girlfriend Sophie for a low-key dinner. Nothing fancy, just pizza at this small, tucked-away place in town that he claimed was one of his favorites. I heard about the place before, and it seemed like the perfect spot to relax and catch up. Aaron and I had been friends for years, but honestly, I hadn't seen him in a while. I knew things between him and Sophie were rocky. It wasn't something that was ever openly discussed, but you could tell. There was always a weird tension when they were around, like they were walking on eggshells, trying to hide something. Despite that, I figured maybe tonight would be different, that it was just a phase and they were in a better place. I mean, how bad could it be, right? When I arrived, Sophie was already sitting at the table scrolling through her phone. She gave me a smile and a polite wave, but it didn't take long to notice she wasn't exactly excited to be there. Aaron showed up a few minutes later, looking like he'd just had a long day. He threw a quick, tired greeting at me before taking a seat, and right away I could tell something was off. It wasn't like their usual banter. This time it felt more tense. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. Aaron seemed a little more irritable than usual, and Sophie was quieter than normal. At first, I thought maybe they were just tired, or maybe it was one of those days, but as we started chatting, it became clear that there was more going on. We ordered our food, and for a while, things seemed okay. The waitress brought us drinks, and we all had a few laughs about random things. Nothing serious. But then it happened. It wasn't anything huge, just a small comment from Aaron about Sophie being a little late. He didn't seem mad, but there was an edge to his voice that caught my attention. Sophie snapped back almost immediately, saying something about how he always found something to complain about. I wasn't sure what to make of it at first. Relationships have their ups and downs, right? Maybe it was just a small thing, a moment of frustration that would pass. But then things started to spiral. The argument went from a petty comment about being late to something bigger. Aaron said something that completely took me off guard. I wasn't prepared for the weight of his words. He looked at Sophie and accused her of always relying on him, that she'd never been able to make decisions on her own. At first, I thought it was just another one of those stupid passive-aggressive jokes, but Sophie's reaction made it clear this was not a joke. Her face went red, and for a second, she just stared at him, speechless. It was like a switch had been flipped. The playful tone they had been using earlier was completely gone, replaced with something darker. And then the accusations came out. Sophie, who had been quiet up until this point, suddenly snapped. She accused Aaron of being controlling, of constantly putting her down, of not supporting her career or her dreams. The words hit the table like a slap in the face. I hadn't expected that. I had no idea that this was even an issue. But as Sophie went on, I realized this wasn't just about the usual relationship problems. This was deeper, much deeper. Aaron, who had been quiet up until that point, wasn't having it. His face flushed red, and I could see the anger bubbling up inside him. He didn't even try to understand her point. Instead, he got defensive and started yelling at her, calling her selfish for even bringing it up. He accused her of trying to make him the villain, even though, from where I was sitting, he sure looked like the villain in that moment. I was starting to feel extremely uncomfortable, like I was intruding on a private moment that I shouldn't be part of. I wasn't sure if I should say something, try to step in, or just sit there and pretend like I didn't see what was happening. Emily and I had been in awkward moments before, but this was something else. The argument quickly escalated. Sophie stood up, knocking over her drink in the process. The glass spilled across the table, but it didn't stop her. She grabbed her purse, her hand shaking, and stormed out of the restaurant. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. In an instant, the vibe of the whole place shifted. The sounds of the restaurant, the chatter, the clinking of silverware, faded into the background. The staff came over, asking if everything was okay, but honestly, what could they do? It was already too far gone. Aaron didn't even move to chase after her. He just sat there, his face twisted in frustration, not caring at all. I stared at him for a moment, unsure what to say or do. He wasn't acting like the guy I knew at all. This wasn't the friend I'd gone on countless outings with, the guy who used to crack jokes and make everyone laugh. This was someone else, a version of Aaron I wasn't familiar with. Sophie had just left in tears, and he couldn't have seemed less bothered by it. I didn't know if it was better to stay quiet or to try to say something, but Aaron didn't seem like he wanted to talk, and honestly, neither did I. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and it felt like the air itself was heavy. I glanced at Emily, who was sitting across from me. She looked just as lost as I felt. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, neither of us knowing what to do or say. Eventually, Aaron paid the bill in silence, and we all left. Emily and I didn't say much on the way out, and we didn't see Brian or Sophie again for a while. We didn't reach out. It wasn't like we were mad at them, but it just felt wrong, like we'd been caught in something that was way above our heads. After that night, I started noticing how often Sophie and Aaron's relationship seemed like it was on the brink of something bad. Every time we saw them together after that, the same tension was there. I'd never seen them in the same light again. A week later, they broke up. It wasn't a surprise, but the way it all ended left a lasting mark on me. I guess some things just aren't meant to be, no matter how long you've known someone. And that night, I got a glimpse into just how messy things had become. After that, I never went on another double date with them again. It felt like there was no coming back from what we'd witnessed.